Would you mind telling me, just saying your name and how old you are?
Mylan Gray, I'm 22.
My name is Julian Samuels, and I'm 22 years old.
Where telling me where's home for you and where you grew up?
Home is Kansas City, Kansas. And a little bit like this town called Oliveira in Brazil.
Home is Southern California, so I grew up in Los Angeles and around the Inland Empire, which is a little south of Los Angeles.
Word.
Yeah.
And where's your family from? As far as you know.
My dad's family is from Kansas City by way of Arkansas.
Mom's side of the family is from Jamaica, the Caribbean. Dad's side of the family is from Argentina.
Well,
And then my mom's family is from Wichita, Kansas, by way of East Texas, Quitman, Texas.
and do you know anything beyond that as far as like any connection to the African continent?
No, it's just like the South.
Definitely a stronger affinity to Jamaica, the Jamaican side. But yeah.
True. Now, what does the word diaspora mean to you?
Diaspora? That's a hard question. I guess I haven't thought about like the formal definition of the term in a long time. I think I remember like when I learned what diaspora was, it was like at least some sort of involuntary like migration or like removal from a homeland or something to a different location.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think for me now, like with the knowledge I have now, diaspora means some like an extended cultural and spiritual connection to a different place and time that informs how you move through the world.
Cool. Thank you for that family history. So what do you feel like is your relationship to the African continent?
I've been trying to forge like a relationship as of late. Like birth-wise, growing up, I don't think I was privy to the relationship I had kind of like genetically, I guess you can say, and even like cultural recreations from African cultures. But then as I started to move more into like studies in university and in high school, realizing like the connection that I had to it naturally via the Middle Passage and forced migration, and then cultural aspects, I started to be more curious about what this historical and this contemporary relationship with Africa looks like. And so I like had the privilege to go to Ghana, go to the continent for the first time this previous summertime, and I started to feel myself like beginning to create more of a relationship. Actually, I would say that it started even with my like travels to Brazil, where I started to open myself up to and started to see all the myriad of ways in which like African cultural values, identities, practices, and rituals sprinkle themselves into the lives of diasporic people, or I guess like have been preserved in the lives of diasporic people despite like traumas of white violence. But my relationship now is like, I feel like as I get closer, it gets more complex because I never felt so un-African as when I was like actually in Ghana. Like everything on face presented except for like my hair and like, you know, questions of language and people being like, oh, you've like never spoken anything like you speak English only at home, like you never spoken any like tree, like, or like, oh, like, but where are you like from
Mm.
like, oh, but like you have to know where it goes back, and these questions where the disconnection kind of shines light on the distance and the separation there, but in a way that's like ripe for questions and new understanding. So I'd say that my relationship now is like a distant cousin that you didn't know that you were related to, but you found out you're related to, and by circumstance of time and place, you're trying to figure out, well, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
In the present day and age.
What do you feel like your affinity? Oh yeah, thank you for that answer. What do you feel like your affinity is towards whatever this phrase means to you, American Black culture?
My affinity towards it?
Or how you feel about it? Like, do you feel like a part of it?
Yeah. I think I feel like both within and at times without of it, or like both within and outside of it. Because like my culture growing up and like my black culture growing up was like Jamaican and Caribbean, so it was kind of like extra American in the sense that it wasn't necessarily American. So like while like my Jamaican side of the family has been here for like a few decades. I mean, yeah, a few decades. And there's some degree of like assimilation in black culture. It's still for me like there's a separation there that I'm still trying to wrestle with personally, because like I haven't had all the like experience in cultural like just like immersion in like American black culture that like maybe other people have if they grew up in like predominantly black communities or in black American families and things like that. So yeah.
Do you feel like this separation was ever like harmful? Not harmful, but do you ever feel like this separation like caused you anxiety or like made you feel some type of way, either now or as a kid growing up or anywhere between?
Yeah. I like it's been like ups and downs for me in that regard, because like I think like a phrase that usually comes up to me is like especially being like mixed or like from multiple ethnicities, is like too black for the white kids but too white for the blacks. Like that was something like I had to deal with growing up. In terms of like not having like whatever background or like cultural competency to like be fully accepted into like the black community or the wider American black community, whatever that means. Yeah, also like being very noticeably distinct from like non-black groups or specifically white groups. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say it's some degree of anxiety, but it's not like, I wouldn't call it like a deep alienation. It's just like a struggle to kind of fit in within a narrative that is like both related to my experience, my cultural and like heritage experience, yet also distinct. So it's kind of wrestling with how to figure out where I fit within that, and be honest about like what my like personal culture is and my background within those spaces.
So
vague answer to your question.
Oh no, I appreciate it all. Thank you so much. So yeah, kind of wrapping up here. Just for some context, something I'm interested in is we had to do this reading called "We Need New Diasporas" that kind of discussed like the desire for different stories, different heritages, like you were saying, to be represented, whether they be in media or whether they be just in academia or things like that. What in your world would a new diaspora look like?
A new diaspora. You said like the reading kind of focuses on like new, was it like artistic forms?
Yeah, mostly it was observing. For example, I think the title also came from the book that we had to read for our 3 books. We Need New Names, and it focused mainly on African writers and how they were conceptualizing different forms of migration. Not necessarily being super tied to slave narratives and things like that, and especially you having this multiple ethnicity and a black identity that is definitely rooted in America, but definitely is extra American, like you said. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on like what that looks like, or if you feel like there's new narratives or new diasporic narratives that maybe make people like you feel more connected, or people that share your experience. If that makes sense.
I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think the main thing that comes to mind for me is like in terms of new diaspora is like just letting like black people have like the freedom to create like what just like, I know it's cliche, but like what they want to create, like give like black artists and like writers and creators just like the freedom to like, and like the resources or whatever to put art out in capacity that isn't always connected to like trauma or pain or like oppression. Like I don't know. I think I saw a thread on Twitter or something like the past couple of days. I was like, I don't know, just like what if like black movies weren't always tied to like what we assume them to be tied to, like I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, like I don't know, it'll come to me maybe, but like yeah, like the narrative of like what a black like artistic form is, I feel like is very much tied to like the political and like social realities that black people face in this country, and I feel like to some degree, while that's very important, like engaging with that context, I think to some degree, like allowing for there to be maybe more cultural exchange with other black, like diasporic peoples from like places like, I don't know, like Latin America or the Caribbean or other places, or even connecting back to like the continent, like seeing like what kind of artistic and cultural forms we can blend into like whatever concept, like 21st century notion of like blackness we have, and figuring out what does it look like you're saying, like what does it look like to have like prominent like African writers, like what kind of narratives do they weave, you know, what does that mean for like black American art, and like how audiences here would see that. Yeah, like what are the affordances of weaving in various new black art forms or African art forms into like the existing, not like canon or like lexicon, but just like cultural space. I don't know, those are just some thoughts.
For sure.
But, yeah.
Last question: who has the best food in the black diaspora?
Don't ask me that, Scooby. By far. Don't at me. My mom's food. Don't come from my family.
All right. Well, thank you so much.